Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on today's session. We are hosting three sessions today for our webinar. We're really excited about it. This month's theme is going to be discussing equity, diversity, and inclusion in the fashion industry. My name is Jeff Suarez. I work for Indigo, which is a Canadian retailer that focuses on books, lifestyle products, and kids products. There, I get to focus on sustainability and ethical sourcing. I'm also a very proud member of the Fashion Takes Action Board, where I get to partner with amazing and wonderful folks like Kelly, who is our CEO and leader here on this very critical work of sustainable change in the fashion industry. I can see that people are still joining us here. So while that's happening, love to hear from everybody on this that's joining us about where you are coming from. So let us know where you're joining us from this morning. Quiet group. St. Paul, Minnesota, Toronto, Massachusetts, Calgary, Montreal, lots of Canadians here, Dallas, Texas, wonderful. Treaty 13 in Toronto, wonderful. Vancouver, someone from the UK, Montreal, London, Ontario. That's great. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us from wherever you're joining us from this morning. I am joining you all from Toronto, Ontario. I'd like to acknowledge the land that I am standing on today is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. As everyone continues to join in today, thank you again for being here with us this morning. We are really excited to be on this journey here about addressing racism and supporting the systematic change that's needed in our world. And we're particularly going to focus today on the fashion industry. We are absolutely honored to have the voices that are going to be joining us today. We are thrilled to be hearing about their experiences and their stories. And shortly, I will turn it over to those folks, and you'll hear a little bit less from me. And in that meantime, some housekeeping things. There will be plenty of time for questions. In the bottom of the chat, you will see the Q&A function, and that is meant to be for where all your questions can go. You can also vote on the questions, and the questions with the most votes will likely get up to the very top, and those will be answered first. We also ask you to continue to use this chat function as well here to share different links, different things like that, and then reserve your questions for the Q&A side. And also, we'd like to remind you that this session is being recorded, and then we will share out the links at the end of this session. Before we begin, none of this happens today without our wonderful sponsors. So we would like to give a shout out to BDC and Stringer LLP, who without their support, we would not be able to bring these sessions to you at little to no cost. So thank you again for sponsoring these. We'd like to introduce this first session that we're going to be doing today. The theme for the first session is going to be inspiring a more inclusive and dynamic fashion landscape. We're going to be hearing about a very successful collaboration between Indigenous Fashion Week and Quebec-based retailer Maison Simons. Our moderator for today is going to be Monica James. She is the manager of Indigenous banking at the BDC. Hi, Monica.
Hi, Jeff. How are you doing today?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to leave you here and welcome in your two guests this morning, and I will join back at the end of it and have a great session.
Thank you. Tansei, I'm actually joining you today from the traditional territory, Treaty 1, and the homeland of the Métis Nation in Winnipeg. At the Business Development Bank of Canada, diversity and inclusion is very important to us. So I was so excited when I was asked to join and moderate this panel. It's near and dear to my heart, and it's very important to the Business Development Bank of Canada. We don't have much time today. We have 30 minutes, so we're going to have some Q&A, and then we're going to open it up to everybody at the end to ask some questions if they have any. I'm going to ask the two panelists a number of questions, which hopefully spurs some questions that you have, and please feel free to ask questions in the chat below. So I'm very excited. We have two amazing ladies joining us today. We have Sage from IFWTO and Oceane from La Maison Simons. So I will let these ladies introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Sage.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Kelly and FTA for inviting me and continuing to open your arms to Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto. I'm the artistic director at Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto, and we're a biennial festival, a multi-platform festival of Indigenous-made fashion, craft, and textiles. I say multi-platform because we offer more than a traditional fashion week. And that is to support creating space for Indigenous designers. And that's really where my focus lies in, is creating space for Indigenous designers and for this land that we all live on. I'm Sage Paul. I was born and raised in Toronto in Gabriel Dumont, which is a native housing complex here. I am a member of English River First Nation, which is in northern Saskatchewan in Patchneck, where my dad was born on the land, and my mom is fourth generation Canadian. And I think it's really important to always introduce ourselves in that way, because Canada is so diverse, and that's why we're having this conversation. We're no longer sitting, I don't believe we're longer functioning in the capitalist system that Canada is basically based on. So I'm so happy to be here and provide my perspective. And yeah, Oceane.
Hi, everyone. My name is Oceane Stanislas. I'm originally from France. I am now a proud citizen of Canada. And I am the buyer for the designer department for La Maison Simons since it's been for 6 years now. La Maison Simons is a French Quebec-based retailer, family owned since 1840. Now, we have stores are expanded through both coasts, so it's a large organization, and I had the pleasure to work with Sage and Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto on a beautiful collaboration that we launched last spring.
Thank you very much, Sage and Oceane. Let's get started with these questions. So for those that aren't aware of the collaboration between IFWTO and La Maison Simons, can you just give us, tell us on how it came to be?
You want to start, Oceane?
Yeah, actually, it was prompted by a conversation. Sage and I first met in Toronto during a panel. And so she's super open and was very open-minded to my very naive questions. So I took this opportunity to ask them freely. And being from France and from Paris, couture in fashion is very important and is defined by those handmade high-level craftsmen. And so one of my questions was why we didn't see more of the Indigenous artistry in mainstream Canadian fashion. And that's what prompted the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very exciting to actually, I have never really been able to sit in rooms with people who are from stores like Simons or anything for that matter. And I think that's just been an issue. And so that's why I started Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto, is to create those spaces. But when I was finally able to meet Oceane as a part of that panel, that your willingness to look at like how can we broaden the work that is happening in Canada in fashion was really, really exciting. And to like know that we share similar values, I think it really closed a gap for me that I saw in the industry, and even my perceptions on like the industry is so on the other side, but there is a lot of really great work happening in the industry. And so that conversation really allowed us to not just talk about the things that we care about, but the exciting thing that I found was that like we worked together to actually mobilize the project. And I think that's one thing that often doesn't happen. Everyone likes to talk about these really great ideas, but like, let's actually make them happen. And I really was happy and excited to do that, to make that happen.
Oceane, what you think was your naive questions were actually great questions, because you actually had the courage to ask and approach Sage, and look where everything came out in the end. So there might be other people that are joining us today from all over Turtle Island that are thinking the same thing. How do I actually get this conversation going? So going into the collaboration, from both of your perspectives, what was your expectation of the project?
For me, I've had my own personal experiences. I started in fashion school, so I had, like I was saying, out of a certain kind of perspective of the industry as being very exclusive, very white, to say it in like not great terms, you know, very based on how much money you had. So there were a lot of barriers, and these are barriers that a lot of people in my community face. So I guess the expectations I had going in, especially knowing we're working with designers from across the country, is making sure that the designers were represented in the way that they felt was authentic and true to who they were as individuals, as members of various First Nations and various Indigenous nations across Canada. So it was really about making sure that they were given a platform that they felt safe in, essentially, and that they, you know, didn't feel like they were being objectified or exploited in any kind of way. And that goes from everything from what their work is and what they're allowed to create for a project like this, to payments, to the way that they're represented in media. And these are all conversations that Oceane and I took a lot of time to have and make sure that it was a balance. Because of course, you know, still a business and there's still things that need to be met there, but it was a lot of conversation, and I was definitely focused on you know, a successful project where the designers were being nurtured.
Okay.
It took about a year just to work through all the steps of this project before it could be launched, even more than that. And the first steps were really instrumental, being like working with Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto as well. Like, the project wouldn't have been possible without their help and their partnership, because it's not something that one company can tackle head on without any support from the community or from the from an organization that has ties with the artists and know, you know, what needs to be done to, you know, ensure that they're respected in the collaboration. And so for me, it was important that the goal of the project was really to sort of bring awareness to a large audience to what Indigenous creativity is today, and try to make it as democratic as possible. Sage agreed that it would be more beneficial to be able to share it with a larger audience. So I think also tackle some of the preconceived ideas about what Indigenous art, like craftsmanship, is. There are a lot of great modern artists today that needs to be recognized and that are doing incredible work. So that was the main goal for the collaboration. Yeah.
That's great. So the next question I was going to ask, what are some of the wins and challenges? And Sage, you said you were looking, your expectations were to ensure that there was a platform and that these artists were represented to be authentic and true to their values and their designs that they're creating. And then Oceane, you talked about making sure that there's awareness and breaking down barriers. So maybe if you can elaborate a little bit on that. So what are some of the wins and challenges that came out of this collaboration?
For me, the most important part was to make sure that the artists would be fairly compensated for each piece. There's a lot of work going into working on a piece, and especially by hand. So we needed to make sure, working with Sage and Indigenous Fashion Week, that we could really compensate them fairly and also make sure they had enough pieces to work on so that it would be a meaningful project to them and that they could express themselves fully through the collaboration. So in order to be able to do that, we actually used one of the strengths of La Maison Simons, which is to produce garments. We have an internal design team, we have production capacity. So we use that in order to produce a base garments and lower the cost so we could invest more on the craftsmanship and the artisans' work. So it was a challenge for the artists, because obviously working on a finished garment is much harder and has different limitations, but Sage was really great in being open to that idea and bringing it to the artists and making sure they were comfortable. We sent them samples of the fabric. The fabrics were really elevated. We worked with linen, organic cotton, and the shapes were also more on the designer's side. So we try to have interesting shapes even for base garments so that the artist would be happy to work on the pieces. That was also important. So that was part of the challenges, and we obviously it ended up being a good decision. So I'm really happy about that. One of the wins was the reception of the collaboration by the customers and the medias. It was really successful. We were in the middle of the pandemic, right at the beginning. So now I feel like we settled a little bit more in the new normal, but back then it was just chaos. And I remember everything was on the table, but the project was so close to being released that we decided to just go on with it and jump, and it was such a great success. I feel like it came like a very positive project and in the middle of all this negative I don't know things happening. I don't know what's your take on it, Sage, but I feel like it came at the perfect time to give us all something great to hang on to.
It totally did. Well, we had no idea if we were able to launch it, and I'm so glad that we did, because working with the designers, like you said, making sure designers were paid and paid a fair price, and so that was something that was very important also to me. How that process even looked like, when designers were paid and how much they were being paid. And then on top of being launched during a pandemic, that would have been the most integral time to make sure that artists were being paid when everyone was losing work. And I think not even just Indigenous artists, but artists and designers across the country are entrepreneurs, they're small businesses, and they operate where they have to receive fair money and in a reasonable amount of time. And Simons was just really wonderful about working with us and the designers to make sure that happened. And I think that's a barrier that a lot of designers, Indigenous designers, it's almost mystified into how that looks. And so when you're looking at things like wholesaling, it becomes, we don't really see wholesaling because everything is made by hand. So it's very difficult to wholesale an item. So we're looking at these projects to think, how can we mass produce for a broader audience in a way that is going to create the space for Indigenous designers, but also so that it's realistic. So it's actually viable for them to do the project. So I thought that was super, super successful in that approach that we were able to take with this project. Also I wanted to bring up so last night I was watching a documentary called The New Corporation. And I don't know if anyone has watched that yet, but it is it blew my mind. And I'm so glad I actually watched it before today, because diversity and inclusion and the successes of these kinds of projects, we really do mark these successes and challenges by these small moments, which we have to, but it really is a part of a bigger problem, which is these corporations, which is capitalism, which comes from Europe, mostly the UK, I believe. And then the whole world is set on that, including colonialism and slavery, and all of that wraps back into fashion. And so when I'm watching this film last night about the new corporation, where corporations are at and the impact it's having on the environment, on our communities, on Indigenous communities, there was all this conversation about all of this bad stuff that's happening. And there was one moment where Indigenous people were coming in, and that was when we were at the front lines in protest against what was happening to our land. And that's the only time I saw our people being represented. And I was like, man, like if we were at the front of if we were leading with these corporations, I don't believe that this kind of stuff would be happening in our industries, in the fashion industry. And so that's why I was so hopeful with this project. And after I watched it, I was like, wow, I'm really glad that we got to work with Simons and with Oceane in a way where Oceane really brought us to the table as a partner, to have these conversations that are so important, that puts us at the front and leading that conversation, because it really wasn't just about, like, the marketing and the media was amazing, and the audience response was amazing, and it was like, it gives me chills still thinking about it, but it really was about, because Oceane also opened up that space and shared that space for us to be there to make those more leading decisions. It wasn't just about creating beautiful work, which it was very, very beautiful work. It was a lot about the decision making in the back end. And so I'm just saying about that movie is like, there's places where we have opportunity to kind of stop those big picture issues by diversifying in our leadership that we put
Definitely.
together.
And I'm 100% with you on that, meaning that if you don't create enough room, the project cannot be successful, because you won't have you won't ask the proper questions, you won't take the right actions, and then that's when ahead of time, and then that's when during the project you face much bigger challenges, because you didn't take enough time to do the proper work in the beginning to make sure everybody could work together in a positive way. And it was very important also for us to make sure that we adapted the way we work in order to respect the artisans' schedule. And Indigenous Fashion Week was instrumental in helping us better understand how we could adapt. And it wasn't, I mean, we didn't have to make huge changes. It was not like very difficult. It was just about doing it. And that was really, really important.
And it was brilliant in the way like that there was the canvas, essentially, like the collection that Simons put together, and very thoughtfully. It wasn't an afterthought. It was like really, really beautiful garments that were made. And so that just allowed it to be more viable, where we're able to share our resources. So that gave the designers the opportunity to really hone in on their craft for this project, to like just basically that working together and that collaboration and sharing of resources and skills. Yeah.
So research has shown that companies that are diverse and inclusive in their workforce, in their workplace, and the marketplace are more profitable. So you can show that with the project between IFWTO and La Maison Simons, that the bottom line is the company does, they're going to be bringing in more money because they're looking at things that are different, that are diverse and inclusive. So congratulations to you. I think we're scratching on the next topic. So Oceane, what does inclusivity mean to you?
Well, I feel like Sage should start that answering that first. I think I want to hear from her about
Oh man, honestly, I do feel like conversations of inclusivity and diversity are it's trendy right now, and so it really does concern me when I hear these conversations and talking about things that are trendy. People are using this idea of inclusivity and diversity as marketing for profits. Like you said, we want to talk about things that are profitable. I know that these are all businesses, but in the end, we're all human. And when we're exploiting each other's cultures and this idea of diversity just to appear in a certain way, it's actually not inclusive and diverse. So that's what I kind of step back from conversations like that, and even with appropriation, because I've really turned to creating spaces for my own community, and working with individuals that I feel I trust in a way that are going to, oh, did I cut out? Did I cut out? I hope I didn't.
It's either you or me that cut up.
Okay. Okay,
Sorry.
I'm back. Yeah, so I think it's really about like, I feel like the conversation is often only one-sided, like the businesses have to be diverse and inclusive, but there are so many Indigenous groups out there who are already doing this work. Why are not corporations partnering with those Indigenous groups and going in side by side to lead certain projects? And so for me, yeah, inclusivity and diversity is really like there, you know, you want to bring in, have more representation of more colorful faces in your advertising, and you want to ensure your, you know, labor standards are ethical and the environment is taken care of. And there's all these like corporate responsibilities that I think are necessary, but I think it's really important to walk that talk, and that means putting people into leadership roles, and allowing Indigenous people or whoever, you know, you're working with to help make those decisions. When we look at the Simons project, a lot of that we did together, a lot of the pieces didn't look stereotypically Indigenous, and that was a part of, you know, the conversation, was that we can't put any limitations or guidelines on what the designers are going to create. We all come from very different communities. We're living in cities, we're living on reserve, and we interpret our traditions in different kinds of ways. And so you just wanted to like provide that freedom. And I think, again, going back to that leadership is just like allowed for that to happen. So like inclusivity, I can go on and on, but I think it really is just about sharing that space again, and making sure that you're allowed, like not just appearing to be diverse, but actually bringing in people who are making the decisions.
You make a great point. Absolutely. Oceane, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, actually, I mean, it happened that when we started the project, inclusivity and wasn't at the forefront of the media attention. We started with a genuine interest in the work and the Indigenous culture. And so, I mean, it's part of Simon's value to have a positive impact on their community in Canada. And so for us to represent Indigenous artistry was at the heart of the project. It wasn't done because we wanted to add that to the flavor of the year. So I think that's why it was so successful too. It felt really genuine in the end because it was.
Great, thank you. So we have a question here. How can non-Indigenous people respectfully purchase items created by Indigenous artists and designers? So Sage, I'll let you take that one.
I think, how can you respectfully purchase from Indigenous designers? I think you go to the marketplaces and buy from them. It really, but sorry, I'm being silly. I know that's not your question, but I think there is this fear around being called out for, you know, appropriating or misrepresenting cultures. And I always find that funny when people feel that way, when there's like, oh no, someone's going to say something bad about me for wearing beadwork. When a lot of Indigenous people cannot walk into a store and have people follow them around just for the very fact of the way they look. So I feel like that sense of fear to me is like, it just feels like, what is more important about being afraid of how we appear? And purchasing from Indigenous designers and wearing it, one, it's beautiful, beautiful work. And if designers are selling it, they've created something that they can sell to you. Indigenous designers are not going to sell you something that you shouldn't be wearing. And for the most part, and and I think, of course, there's issues like Urban Outfitters who have appropriated a lot of our work, and so that's where the issue comes from, is because of those mistakes that have happened, and that greatly impacts our economies. You know, there's Indigenous designers are creating work across the country, and just purchasing the work and wearing it with pride and learning about the designers really. It's going to elevate people's knowledge about Indigenous made work, the stories behind that work. And so I think it's the respectful thing to do is to purchase from Indigenous designers and to work with Indigenous communities. And
So
maybe
I think that the question was, we got some feedback, but I think that where they're going with the question was, where do we even find Indigenous artists? Because we can't find them in a general retailer. You know, except for when Simons had was doing the collab with you. But if they're looking for an independent Indigenous artist, designer, where can they go and find them? Because it's a new market for them. And I understand that when people are looking to connect with the Indigenous market, it's scary, but I think it's very cool actually that they've put up their hand saying, I want to be doing work, or I want to be supporting Indigenous entrepreneurs, artists, designers. So where would somebody go if they're looking to purchase authentic work created by an Indigenous designer artist?
Yeah, if you're looking for Indigenous made fashion and craft and textiles, there's partnerships that are happening. And I know there's a lot, like, this is why we're having this conversation now. There is that push to get Indigenous made work and BIPOC work into the department stores so it is more readily available. But also Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto, we do a marketplace. We're biennial, so we happen in the end of May, beginning of summer, where we feature 50 designers and artists. That's in person. This year we were online. Also, if you're just looking online, like honestly, Instagram is like, you can buy everything from Instagram from any community. And if you search the hashtag Indigenous fashion, the work that you will come across, it's just the number of designers that are out there doing work is amazing. And I love Instagram because it has become this great platform where people are able to actually run their businesses by selling through Instagram. And then there's other shops, like I know Simons has the Fabrique, I always forget the number, but
1840.
Fabrique 1840, and that's kind of like a Shopify platform. And I know there are a few Indigenous designers on there. I believe Warren Stephen Scott is on there, and Carolyn Monet has been featured in Edito with some of her artwork. So I think it's also about looking into the more local shops like Fabrique to find Indigenous made work. Yeah. But the market's growing, but it's not as visible as mainstream fashion.
So I want to address it on the buying side, like as a buyer professionally. We do go through buying circuits and fairs, and there are those fairs during Fashion Week, usually in New York and Paris, internationally, where agencies where we can see different brands, emerging brands that are promoted or pushed forward. And I have to say that there is work to be done to increase also Indigenous brand presence in those fairs, in those circuits, because that's why sometimes there is a lack of representation in the mainstream fashion industry, is because it is hard. I'm talking from personal experience, and that's why working with Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto was instrumental in finding the artists and working with them, is because as a buyer, trying to find Indigenous brands to bring in your store wholesale is difficult. It is something that requires more work. It is not readily available on like the business circuit of buying and wholesale buying. So there's definitely some work to be done there as well.
Yeah. I think there's two sides, right? There's the retailer, and then there's the consumer. So the consumer, Right. I think Instagram is a great place to go. Somebody mentioned Indigimall. Yes, I've heard of it. It's great timing. That's where, you know, Indigenous artists can go and sell their product that they have. And then from the retailer's perspective, you know, it takes somebody like an Oceane to have the courage to reach out to, you know, Sage with Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto to really start a collab. So from the retailer perspective, you got to be working with organizations such as Sage's, and then, you know, Instagram, and then going on Indigimall. Those are great places to start for sure.
I want to add to that. It's like you brought up such a good point, Oceane, about not the representation in those, in like fashion weeks, so like New York, and the reason why I see that happening is because those systems are just not set up to support small businesses, individuals, entrepreneurs, and most Indigenous designers I'm working with are not vying to be, you know, a Simons or a Gucci. I'm sure they want to have that level of success, but whatever success means to them. But there's so many barriers that do not allow Indigenous designers to be there. Financial barriers, especially just like knowing people. And that's why platforms like Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto, where we are like, we pay our designers to be on our runway. Like they don't have to pay us to be on our runway. And that's very uncommon. So we're really looking at models, and we take after a lot of arts festivals models to make sure that we are working with designers in a way so that it is accessible, so that there is that we can make those connections between Oceane and designers. And it's just like really like the system is what needs to change. You know, why are there not designers there? It's not because they don't exist, it's because there are barriers that are preventing them from being there, and that just needs to change.
So one last question for the people that are on the call today. What's one thing that they can do today in order to make change, in order to be more inclusive, in order to be working with Indigenous artists? What's one thing that they can do today to implement?
You go ahead, Oceane.
I think there is something very easy is to ask questions. I know it sounds very basic, but it's not. Ask the right question and don't be afraid to ask them. It's take humility a little bit because you know, we're valued for knowing things. So, you know, assuming openly that you don't know anything about something is also a good way to learn more about it. So there's no shame in that. And from those questions, you'll obviously have to act on the answers. So even individual actions are really important. As Sage was saying, question what you buy, like who is it from, who's the artist, and a little bit like buying art, question your buying power, like you're investing your money and having a real impact on somebody if you buy Indigenous art or Indigenous fashion. So it is really important, and it is something that you need to question by yourself and learn, and it's a great journey.
Mm-hmm.
Sage?
You know, when you told us you're going to ask this question, I was like, oh, what am I don't know. There's so much. But I guess like one is buying Indigenous. That's always kind of my first go-to. And now that I'm thinking about it, I think it's really about like sharing knowledge and sharing space. And maybe that's a lot bigger than just saying it. But it was really amazing how open Oceane was and has been through this whole process to share the industry side, like that mainstream industry side with us. So it really was both ways. And yeah, so I think sharing knowledge. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. We have a couple more questions here. So I think that this is great. So thank you to all the participants that are coming with the questions. So some of the questions that we're having is, how do we know that Indigenous people are actually involved when it comes to the design? Are they treated properly? Is a labeling system that helps us know as a retailer?
You know, okay, the States has an Native American Arts and Crafts Act, where you are not allowed to sell or say you've made something, anything that implies that it is connected and made by any Indigenous community. And we don't have that in Canada. but there aren't any tags that can do that. It really is about the research that you have to do into the, like, look into the project, and it can be really difficult to know the authenticity, because marketing is really, really great these days. I don't want to name any projects, but there's some where you can look at a project and they will put those people's faces on their project, but you don't know who's making the garment anymore. You don't know that they've actually had their hands on it. You can tell that the garment's been really manufactured to be more saleable in a certain kind of way, based on how Indigenous it is and how mainstream it is. And yeah, that's a great question, but there really isn't any kind of tag, and there should be.
Okay. One question that we have here is just expanding on some of the barriers to exporting. So other than financial, what are preventing Indigenous designers from exporting?
I would say that, well, financial is a huge one. Also the wholesaling that we were talking about. I know many designers are producing work that is already high priced, and that's not they don't wholesale it, and they can't wholesale it because they are handmade pieces and they're not made overseas. And I don't imagine it will ever change. I hope it doesn't change, simply because that will just add to the problem that the fashion industry has. So yeah, I would say the financial barriers, but also having the connections, have like the doors that are open, they might not be open, and people are not meeting each other, and knowledge is not being shared. And so that's why platforms like Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto are super important, because we are creating a space where we invite people in the industry to connect directly with the designers. We did a really exciting we do industry kind of like speed dating, and we'll just we'll match designers with industry to be able to like present what they're doing, what their work is, and hopefully a project comes out of that, because we really look at fashion as more than just wholesaling. There's opportunities to do exhibitions in the stores. They've what do they call them now? There's the lifestyle stores, where it's more than just about shopping. So I think, yeah, just building and opening up those relationships, I think that's where a huge barrier comes in.
So the sheer fact that we've gone over, I think, is a great testament to the fact that the participants that are on the call understand that diversity and inclusion, racism, they are real issues in the fashion industry. So I want to thank the participants for asking the questions, have the courage to ask the questions, and also joining in this very important discussion. As a retailer, as a consumer, where can you go next? Sage and Oceane, I really want to thank you, because you've really taken a huge leap forward in terms of putting these 8 Indigenous artists and designers in a retail setting. It's something that we haven't seen before in the fashion industry. So I want to thank both of you for having the courage to work on this, even and launching it during the pandemic. I think that is so important that nothing ends up stopping us. I will close by saying, if you have any parting words that you want to share with the participants today.
I want to say that sometimes retailers are arguing that we listen to our customers and our goal is to answer our customers' needs, but I think right now we have another mandate, which is to inspire our customers to shop better and to make better decisions, and they're really open to it. And if you give them the opportunity, they will show you that they're ready and they're there for it as well, which is great.
That's beautiful. That's so inspiring. Yeah, oh my gosh, I love that. Yeah, I would just love for people to come and check out Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto. We have a number of resources to connect and see the designers who we've featured, including for the Simons project, but also we'll be at Nuit Blanche this fall. We'll be presenting other designers, and we keep a database. Well, yeah, we just keep all the designers listed on our website, because it really is important that we start to learn about each other, and you can connect to all of their social medias from there. ifwtoronto.com.
So if anybody wants to continue this conversation, please reach out to Sage and Oceane on LinkedIn or on their websites. They would be happy to continue this conversation. So thank you very much for joining. Jeff?
Thank you, ladies. Great job. Thanks for being here this morning. Great conversation. I personally, I've always admired this collaboration, and hearing a little bit more about it is fantastic. Thank you again to the sponsors that joined, that were with us this morning. So BDC, Stringer LLP, and our next session is at 11 a.m. Eastern time, so about 15 minutes from now, and we're going to be having a fireside chat about the Black experience in the fashion industry. So we'd love for you to come back and spend some more time with us. That's where we will leave you. Thank you all for being here today and being a part of this. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.